everyone, and welcome. I'm Heather from Children's Book World, and I am so excited to be celebrating the release of Lucy Clark Will Not Apologize by Margo Rabb. Welcome, Margo.
Thank you.
It's a book birthday, and I have to tell you that anybody who has come into the store in the last month has heard me just absolutely raving about this book. It is so good. One of my dreams, I think, as a bookseller was to find a book that when I read the first sentence, I couldn't put it down. And there have been books that have pulled me in, but literally, I don't want to give much away, but when you read the first sentence, you're in, you're done. Just realize you're reading the rest of the book. There's no doubt about it. I even had to text my sales rep and say, sorry, I have to move the meeting back. I'm going to be all night reading this book. Aww, it's so good. You're going to absolutely love it. And joining Margo tonight in conversation is Madeline Miller, who is just, of course, amazing and dear and sweet. She is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Circe. And if I knew which side to point on this, I would point. And of course, Songs for Achilles. And we are thrilled to have them both here. And they are much more interesting than I am. So I'm going to disappear and let them take over. Everybody, enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heather. I am so thrilled, Margo, to get to be here celebrating the launch of Lucy Clark Will Not Apologize, which is a fabulous book. I second everything Heather said. And if any of you out there have not yet purchased the book, buy it. It's amazing, and buy it through Children's Book World, which is an incredible local indie bookstore. And also you will get a package of seeds from Margo, the Master Gardener. So you definitely want to get that Children's Book World version, so you can get those seeds. But I just want to say, Margo, that this is such a pleasure because Margo and I moved to this area, to Philadelphia, at the same time, and we both sort of were with each other through the birthing of a book, Circe and Lucy Clark, and I love it. I love it that we went through that together. It has been a privilege to watch this book come into the world, and I'm just so excited for everyone out there to read it. So I'm going to turn it over to you because I think Margo's going to tell us briefly about what the book is about and then read a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Madeline. It's so special to be here with you too, because we were writing them at the same time and meeting together and talking about our struggles and having kids and trying to write. And I loved being there when Circe came out, and we had our book party. Remember dancing to ABBA, which now maybe we could dance separately in our own homes. But I loved watching Circe come into the world. It was just so special. I think seeing a book be made and all of the years of struggles, and then to watch it out there is just such a really special, unique experience to watch a beautiful work of art being made. And I remember when I read Circe for the first time, and I just cried because I knew how much work went into it. And then to see this beautiful work of art, it just was such a moving experience. It's such a thing to witness. And I never thought we'd be during a pandemic doing this.
I know.
The Brady Bunch, but whatever.
We're rolling with it. We're rolling with it.
Next year in person.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Heather. And Lucy Clark is the story of a girl named Lucy who is having a rough time. She goes to a boarding school in Austin, Texas, and she's unfortunately kicked out of boarding school and sent to be a caregiver to a woman in New York City, an eccentric millionaire named Edith. And it turns out that Edith doesn't actually even need a caregiver. What she needs is someone to help her, because it turns out that she thinks someone is trying to murder her. And it's up to Lucy to help her try to figure out who it is. And Edith is also a famous gardener. And she gardens at a beautiful public garden that she helped create that's outside of New York. And she also gardens at a private secret garden hidden in the West Village that belongs to Edith's best friend named Mimsy. And it's through Lucy's friendships with these two older women who she becomes very close to, and Lucy discovering a love of flowers and gardens and food, that she really also discovers herself and learns to speak up for herself. And so that's what the book is about.
Wonderful, wonderful. And would you mind reading a short passage for us, just to kick us off here?
I thought I would read a little bit just for like 5 minutes from the middle of the book, and it's from this chapter called Sea Change, which is actually one of the first chapters that I wrote. From my early drafts of the book, and as you know, it takes me a really, really, really long time to write a novel. So the fact that this chapter actually remained is sort of miraculous, because my books go through so many drafts that it, so much ends up on the cutting room floor. But this chapter, it went through a lot of revisions, but it's still in there. And I think when I wrote this chapter, actually was the first time I realized where I started to really understand what the book was about. And it sort of gave me a goal of what to write to. So it's a really special chapter for me. So it's called Sea Change, and it starts with Mimsy and Lucy in a cafe in the West Village in New York. Mimsy and I walked to a tiny cafe. A red bicycle stood outside the front door. White miniature roses grew from its basket. We went inside, and the hostess seated us. I glanced around the cafe. Spindly poles made from birch trees lined the walls, twinkling with tiny lights like fireflies. There were rough-hewn wooden tables and cloth chairs the color of moss. This seemed like a place where you could leave the world behind and forget that awful things were happening outside its walls. Mimsy opened the menu. The center of it had pictures of pastries, and she ordered Edith's favorite things: white peony tea and 3 pink cakes with an upright rose petal balanced on top of each one, as if it were dancing. Dewdrops glistened on the petals like fairies' tears. And she ordered a trio of tiny white tiered cakes that looked like they'd been made for a bunny's wedding. "And let's get the allium, of course, and the cocoa butter gems," Mimsy said to the waiter. She turned to me. "Takes a while for them to prepare those, but wait till you see them." She sighed and leaned back in her seat. "A meal of dessert," she said, "secret to a long life." I gazed around at the twinkling lights and the birch trees. I tried to focus on being here now. I didn't want to miss any of it. Edith returned just as the rose petal cakes arrived, and she smiled. "My favorites," she said. Mimsy stood up and hugged her. "I thought we needed a sea change day," she said. Edith squeezed Mimsy's hand. "We do," she said. "A what?" I asked. "It's a thing since we were teenagers," Mimsy said. "It's from one of Edith's favorite authors, MFK Fisher. She started publishing books in the 1930s, and she wrote about ocean crossings to Europe, sea changes, and how your soul changes when you cross the sea. And she wrote about food and love. If Edith and Mimsy wrote their own self-help book, it would probably be called How to Stay Sane and Happy in a Dark, Dark World." Our tea arrived, and Edith sipped hers slowly. "A sea change day is when you say screw it to everything that's expected of you," she said. "Everything you're supposed to do. It's a way to turn around a blue day, a low day, to take a break and explore. Have dessert for lunch. Eat something beautiful." Which was what we did. We ate the rose petal cakes first. Their dewdrops tasted like sugared snowflakes, and the pink cake burst with raspberries. The plates kept arriving. A giant allium flower like a purple cloud. Mimsy instructed me to reach my spoon inside the flower to retrieve a vanilla and lavender pudding hidden inside it, dotted with violet pearls. The flower petals clung to the pudding like baby purple starfish. The last course came. Sweet green jasmine tea inside round spheres made of cocoa butter. We popped them in our mouths, and they burst into 100 flavors at once. How is this possible? How did food like this exist? Mimsy explained something about liquid nitrogen and molecular gastronomy. I'd never even heard of that before. I thought, grown-ups made this. Grown-ups spent hours creating this magical food. I thought back to when I'd first stepped in Mimsy's garden and time had stopped, and I felt that strange joy, a crack in the universe, a shift in reality. I felt that now too, like someone had performed surgery on my soul and tucked this strange new thing deep inside me, this knowledge of the world and what mattered in it. How there were places where you could go to escape the dark, terrifying world, at least for a little while. How beautiful things, small beautiful things, food and plants and flowers, how they could change you. That food wasn't about numbers and calories and nutrition, but beauty. That those beautiful things could be a key to unlocking a whole world inside of you, a place that you couldn't before reach. It could be protection, an armor, a way to survive the darkness, a way to walk through the world when you wanted to hide in bed all day and all night.
Thank you. I'm so glad you read that part. I love it. And actually, I think this touches on one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because we just had Mother's Day, and I feel like that the role of mothers in your books is really powerful. But I also feel like that you have this amazing ability to evoke these other relationships, these other types of caretakers. And Mimsy and Edith are two such beautiful examples of that they really take Lucy in, and they offer her a type of care that she's not really getting anywhere else. This sort of love, this, soul enrichment. And so I wanted to ask you sort of about writing about found families, and the roles that those have played in your novels, because I think you just write them so beautifully.
Well, that's such a great question. Thanks. As I've written about in my other two books also, it's there's a lot of grief in Lucy Clark. For Lucy, it's her grandmother who's died, but that grief comes from my own experience because I lost my own mom. It's actually 30 years ago this year. She died very suddenly. And so grief is such, it always bubbles up. I think actually every time I write a book, I'm always thinking like, I'm not going to touch grief this time. I'm going to write a light, happy story where everyone's happy and they eat cake, but they do eat cake, obviously, but it always comes, I think, when I'm get to that deep place. It's sort of that central material, I think, that I write about. And there's always sort of new levels of it. I mean, the pandemic has definitely brought up new layers of grief I never saw before. And so the found family is very true for me too, where right when you and I moved to Philadelphia around the same time, we had left Austin, and I hadn't really understood how that move like actually unearthed the grief of losing my mom. And then unfortunately I also lost my dad. He died 7 years after my mom did. And so the friendships in my life have become my family, and they're so close. I do have these wonderful cousins who live in New York City, and they're my family. But without my parents and my grandparents, and I don't have any aunts and uncles, there always is this sort of empty hole. And the close friendships that I felt so lucky to have really felt that. And I think when we left Austin, I realized losing those friendships was so hard for me because they're such a central part of who I am. And I just realized how, the friendships that we have just are such a part of our souls. There's a quote I love from Anais Nin, how each friend in us opens a whole world that we didn't know existed before that friend arrived. And I always love that quote, that, just how important friendships are to us.
Yes, I think that's so true. And I'm glad you brought up the grief too, because honestly, I think that you write about that so beautifully. And this book has, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone. You have to read the book and you'll know when you hit the passage. But it has one of the most beautiful and poignant and dead on descriptions of what it feels like to lose someone that you care deeply about that I have ever read anywhere in any book. And I think I texted you as soon as I read it, Margo, because I was so overwhelmed with how much I loved it and how incredibly poignant it was. And this has been such a year of grief, and reading this book was such a journey because I feel like it honors all that grief, but it also delivers this sea change. It sort of takes you to a new place. So another thing, since we're already on the topic of the pandemic, talk a little bit about writing in a pandemic, because you have figured out a way to write in a pandemic that I am just in awe of.
I'm not sure if figured out is the word, but it's still such a challenge every day. I think I know the passages that you're talking about, but it's interesting actually, because I was thinking Like, how did the pandemic change the writing of this book? Because I did the very final drafts. Actually, I was working on some of my final drafts right when the pandemic started in March of 2020. And it was such a time of terror. But I think it did actually, in some ways, affect the writing of the book. And then I think it took me to an even deeper level of grief than I'd ever realized, and of fear. There's actually, I describe Lucy as having, when she gets scared, her palms start to water like so much. It's not even sweat. And that actually is like, that's something that happened to me when, unfortunately, like, our whole family got sick in early March. And we did actually eventually test negative for COVID, but we were the very first tests in our little local family practice. They like their hands were shaking getting the COVID tests out. I mean, they were so afraid of us. And that feeling of, just the feeling of people being afraid of you I'd never felt that in my life. And it was such a profound experience, like a new type of fear I'd never even realized. So I think that enabled me to get sort of deep into those feelings for the characters, like to access another level. But the actual writing itself was such a challenge, as with my kids in remote school and my husband working from home and my cats. I've lost them out now, but they're like basically like permanently attached to me. I feel like I've had a cat on me for 14 months, except for right now. But I ended up actually working a lot outside, and I uncovered this spot in our backyard behind the garage and sort of set up a writing desk there. But then it got a lot of mosquitoes. So I ended up purchasing, eventually I purchased one of those bubble tents that the restaurants have. And that's like my beloved writing space right now. But there's still always challenges. Even the last 10 days, they've been replacing the roof next door. So there's been like a constant banging. And one of my best purchases was I bought noise canceling headphones, and I've been wearing them pretty much constantly during the day. I feel like you and I are in a contest for the most eccentric writer in our town. And I think as I walk around I look like I'm landing an airplane.
I love it. I love it.
But I wanted to thank you too, because one of your writing techniques when you worked on Circe was editing pages as you walked. And for me, that's been a key way, like especially as they've been replacing the roof and with people around all the time. So I did this with Lucy Clark, but I would take the manuscript pages and walk around the neighborhood and edit it and stop in some poor neighbor's yard and sit down and write. And the essay I've been working on right now, I've been doing that too, just walking around the neighborhood. And someone said to me the other day, I'm not even aware of who's around me, but some guy was walking his dog and he's like, "Oh, you look like Gertrude Stein." Which, I don't know if that's a compliment, but
I think it is. I definitely think so. That's amazing. I love that. Yes, it's so helpful, I think, because moving, I don't know, for me, motion always helps me write. And then, I don't know, there's something about just being kind of out in the world that makes me see it in a new way. So I hope I get to catch you in one of the neighborhood walks with your pages.
We'll bump into each other because we're not even looking where we're going.
Well, you talked a little bit about moving here from Austin, and I wanted to ask, because I know that one of the things that helped inspire this book, you and I had talked about this, were some gardens in the area. What were some of because the scenes of gardening in the book are so powerful and so beautiful and so exciting. And I feel like they really just invite you into the world of flower love and herb lore, and poisons as well, of course. We're dealing with a murder mystery after all. But I wanted to ask, what are some of your favorite gardens, and how did gardens kind of inspire this novel?
When we moved here, and I had this crazy experience where I fell absolutely madly in love with this local garden that's called Chanticleer Garden in Wayne, and I actually ended up writing a whole essay about it for the New York Times. And the essay is actually related to the book in that I started the essay because when I was researching Lucy Clark, I didn't know any horticulturists. I wanted to write about a gardener, a famous horticulturist. So I just asked the staff at Chanticleer if there was anyone that would be willing to talk to me. And they put me in touch with a gardener at Chanticleer named Chris. And Chris is a lovely person, and he helped me so much with all of the characters in this book, even the 70-something-year-old female Edith. So I learned so much about gardening, and I realized through going to Chanticleer just how much a garden could be so healing. Just walking around a public garden, how for me Chanticleer Garden was just a really soothing place. It really sort of helped me with the grief over my mom, and just really just be a place where I felt myself again. Like every time I went there, when we moved, it was, we were trying to buy a house and get the kids settled, and it was so stressful, and the cats were freaking out. And anytime I went to Chanticleer, I just would always say to myself, like, oh, I feel like myself here. Like I feel like myself again. And I realized just how gardens were a place where I felt like the real part of myself, like the good, the calm parts. And for me, and even in our teeny little garden in our front yard, I've grown a lot of dahlias since we moved here, which was a flower I'd never grown before. And that's part of the book too, is I really fell in love with growing dahlias. And they come into bloom in August, really, in our garden. And I have like 60 plants, and each plant can produce, up to 60 flowers. So it's a little bit of a crazy scene then, but I love just hiding in the dahlia patch. And it's like a little teeny mini version of Chanticleer for me, where I feel like myself there, and just among the flowers. So I didn't know how like healing flowers could be till I had that experience.
Mm-hmm. And having seen that dahlia patch, I can say it is truly magnificent. I think my favorite is it Winnie the Pooh dahlias? Is that right?
Pooh. I love those.
They're exactly the colors, the kind of orangey and red. Everyone should Google them because they're really cool looking. So I'm going to shift a little bit here, because one of the other things I love about your writing, and this book in particular, is, Margo, you write the best villains. I love your villains. I feel like they, a really good villain should have, can't be too exaggerated, but you have to really feel that sort of like impotence, like, how am I going to get around this person? How can I, that sort of incredibly satisfying feeling of helplessness of the hero in the face of this person who is purely obstructionary. Do you have any favorite villains from literature? How do you think about your villains? How do you write such good villains?
Oh, thank you. I think actually, I don't know if you feel this, but one of the best parts of writing fiction, since I do write essays and nonfiction too, but my favorite part of writing fiction is that you can actually like use real people. Fiction is such a great place to process. Like, you can't do this in an essay if you want to still like live in the world, But in fiction, you can take bits of and pieces of different people who are kind of villains in your life, and actually it feels so good. I don't know if you feel that satisfaction too, but
that's very therapeutic. Now I'm really interested. Now I'm going to go back and read again.
Villain writing is so incredibly satisfying. It feels really good. I mean, it's funny. One thing that was really inspiring when I was writing this book, I mean, over the very long process of writing it, was my kids were younger than when I started it, and we saw Matilda the musical actually several times while writing it, and Miss Trunchbull and the villains actually really, in the way Matilda experiences school, that institutional school. But I remember Matilda really struck a deep part of me. I think just, Lucy Clark is about speaking up for yourself, and Matilda is also about like finding your voice with Matilda and Miss Honey, and speaking up for yourself, and about a found friendship with Matilda and Miss Honey. But I remember we sat there in the musical, and I was crying during some of the songs, like When I Grow Up and Quiet, because just thinking of Matilda speaking up and her friendship with the librarian, like just speaking up for yourself. And that feeling, I think, of being like a powerless kid really resonates with me. Yeah. And how I've been thinking about that a lot during the pandemic too, with my own kids, who I feel like my own kids have so much empathy for what's happened, and watching grownups, be so numb to what is a mass death event around the world. And I think when you've lost someone, you can't look at what's happening in the world and not feel for every one of those losses. And I feel like my kids have have empathy for that. Whereas I feel like with the grown-ups, it's like, let's just pretend. There's so much of just pretending, you know, everything's okay, or numbness. And so I think that's, you know, it just resonated with me a lot this year too.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I think that openness just informs so much of the empathy. Is suffuses the whole book and all your work. I love that in your work. You alluded to taking a long time to write your books. So we are both in that club, Margo, as you know, But what is it like to live with a story like this for so long? Because how long did it take you, kind of beginning to end, for Lucy Clark?
Gosh, you know, I started it in 2015, which I think we met in, was it 2015 or 2016 when we met? So
yeah, 2015.
It was, you know, I think it was actually so inspiring to me to be friends with you, because you've always been so confident in the process of it taking a long time, like just being cool with that.
Resigned.
I feel like I've often felt like this should be done in a month. I bet if I work really hard, it'll just be done in like 3 weeks. I think I have some magical thinking about how long I can finish it, you know? So it was always really inspiring to me to understand your patience with the work, and that it can take a very, very long time. And your dedication to that process of just showing up and getting to know the characters and doing it justice. I mean, I think it's such a struggle to live with that creative unknown. So it's, you know, I think it's hard for me that it takes a long time, because I always want it to go faster, no matter what I'm writing. Though I do feel like I'm working on a new essay right now, and I do feel like it is the process that I love, the process of trying to figure out what the story is about, and the actual process of writing is still, you know, my favorite part of the, you know, once it's done. I actually found on my desk, talking about a long process, there was one sentence I had thought about adding somewhere in the book during. It was like, it had already like gone to print, and I was like, do I email and add this one sentence in and have them kill me? So I didn't, you know, because I thought they would probably kill me. But then I was looking at it. Of course, I saved it for some reason. I was thinking maybe I'll put it in another novel or an essay or something, because it's a sentence about gardens. And I was thinking like, oh, you know, this actually would have fit really well. Should I go in every copy and paste it in? Can you do that? It really feels done. So I think it's hard. I don't know if you feel this too, but it's hard when it's out in the world to just be like, oh, I guess that's done. I guess I can't add that one extra little sentence. Clearly the best one in the whole book. Right?
It'll be for the next one, or for the essay. I know it is. It can be hard to finally just release it, and yeah, as you know, all that editing you saw me doing, I was editing right up to the wire. changing tiny little things.
It's so funny, because I remember I think we had a conversation. I remember where you were, and I was thinking like, oh my God, I know it's going to be so amazing. You don't have to do anything, because I just knew from Song of Achilles, I was like, this is going to be an amazing book. You don't have to change those words. But then when it's your own book, you're like, I really need to change those words.
I know. Well, yeah, exactly. And ditto right back to you. So, well, tell us a little bit. You mentioned the essay you're working on now. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's so funny I mean, I think the creative process is always so mysterious and strange to me, because, you know, so I wrote that essay about Chanticleer Garden. I wrote a novel about basically finding yourself through a garden and how gardens can change you. And the essay I'm working on right now is because of that Chanticleer essay. Found out about this new secret garden that's was recently discovered in Wilmington, Delaware. It's called the Crown and Shield Garden, and it's part of Hagley Museum and Library. And the director of horticulture there is named Paul Orpello, and he also has a lovely talk that's on YouTube about discovering this garden. And it's just the most spectacular garden. I am so in love with this place. It's not yet open to the public. It's like this magical lost secret garden that was buried for 50 years and is now coming back to life. And writing about it, it's this process where I can't stop writing about it. I mean, I'm constantly disappearing to my bubble tent to work on it. And even I go for walks with my daughter around the neighborhood, and she'll look at me and be like, "Are you writing that essay in your head again?" In the middle of a conversation, just something like, it's like that part of your brain that just, you can't stop. It's really like it starts to write itself. I'm always sneaking away and doing little bits of it. So I think, it's so funny but for me, writing about gardens has become something that's just such a part of my soul right now. Like, it just feels like it's coming from like the deepest place. So I'm really grateful for that, because it's a great way I can't think of a better way to get through the pandemic than hiding away in my bubble tent writing about a garden.
That is wonderful. I love that. Well, I cannot wait to read it. And I know I speak for everyone else here when I say that. So I want to ask you a little bit about some of your sort of the books that nourish you, some of the writers that you hold most dear, and some of the characters. Do you have a favorite literary character? What are some of your favorite books that you kind of return to again and again?
One of my biggest comfort reads that I've been returning to during the pandemic, and that I've been reading with my children too, is Anne of Green Gables, who I'm completely obsessed with. I was just rereading Anne of the Island, which is one of my favorite books. And my daughter and I were watching the 1980s adaptation. I'm very faithful to that one as my favorite adaptation of the books. And I love Anne so much that years ago, one of my closest friends and we took a road trip to Prince Edward Island, where Anne of Green Gables is set. And it's also, a series of books that are about a place and falling in love with a place. And in the book, Prince Edward Island is really a character that changes Anne, and really she becomes herself on Prince Edward Island. So I think that's one of the reasons I feel such a connection to it. And also, I've been thinking a lot about how Anne talks about kindred spirits, and how just, those found friendships that make you who you are. And I think that was something that was so lost during the pandemic, is, even if it only happens once a year, that you meet that like soul friend, and make that kind of deep friendship. That's such a part of our lives. And I think as we're hopefully, knock on wood, coming out of the pandemic and, can make those soul friendships again, I hope that is something that, can be healing for all of us.
Yes. Well, absolutely. And I think, I think it's been so challenging to feel those opportunities cut off, as you say, and to, what happens to Lucy Clark in the novel wouldn't happen during, she gets to fly across the country and go meet all these new people and do all these new things. So hopefully we are coming out of it and back to the age of kindred spirits. Yes, Anne of Green. I love that. Now I feel like I want to go reread Lucy Clark again, because I feel like I can like there's like your love of the natural world. I see that so much also in Anne of Green Gables, just the like beautiful, lush descriptions, and how truly beautiful landscape can be transformative just in itself. Mm-hmm. Have you read anything really, really great? Any book recommendations that you've been reading recently that you love?
I've been reading a book by a friend, Natalie Standiford, called Astrid Sees All, which is fantastic. And I've been reading, sort of to refill the artistic well, Linda Berry. I love Linda Berry. Her book Syllabus about writing, if you've ever seen, I picked it up at the Narberth Bookshop, actually. It's this amazing book about creativity. And she actually has a great podcast. She did an interview with Design Matters, where she talks, I was just listening to it again the other day, where she talks about the advice of her first, one of her first teachers, her teacher named Marilyn, who said, well, Linda Berry was saying that she wasn't sure if she liked her work, if it was good or bad, or what she thought of it. And her teacher, Marilyn, said, "It's none of your business." And I think about that a lot, right? Especially with the book coming out, that your job is to make the work. Like, it's none of your business if you like it or not, or who likes it or not. And I love that too, because especially we're living in this virtual world where everything is either a like or a dislike, or how many stars, or it's so ridiculous when you think about it. And I think our job, if you're making a creative work, your job is just to make the work, and it really doesn't matter how you feel about it or really how anyone feels about it. Is just, getting it out there into the world. So easier said than done. But
Yes, definitely easier said than done. But Margo, that has like changed my life. I'm going to hold on to that. It's none of my business. I feel like that should every writer should have like that on their table.
I do. I have it on my table. It's the Design Matters podcast with Linda Barry. It's so great. I recommend it. It's so amazing. I love her. So if I could, God, I would do anything to meet her someday. She's so amazing.
Well, I have a couple more questions, one more in particular, but I want to just invite people. I see a couple questions are coming in, but after this, I'm going to turn it over to audience questions, and I'll be repeating the questions to Margo. So if you have them, feel free to put them in the comments, and I will see them and pass them on. So I guess that sort of, since we're talking about writing advice, I wanted to ask, what is your sort of, what writing advice would you give to young or early career writers out there, sort of from your own, since this is your third novel now, plus many essays, many book reviews. What is your piece of writing advice?
I think that it's none of your business. But also, I think for me, one of the things that has been most important to me, is still so important to me, is keeping a diary. And I actually keep a handwritten diary. And I have over 100 of them, well over 100 of them now. And for me, I've kept it since I was 9 years old, and it's helped me. It helped me get through the deaths of my parents and the loss of them. It helped me. It's helped me get through the pandemic. I'm on my fourth one since the pandemic started, and I was just looking at them and thinking just how much I'm going to go back and reread them, and how much they've helped me get through. And they've helped me with every single book. I realized like all of the ideas for my books usually start in my diaries. And for me too, it's a place, I always do it handwritten, and, it's a place that's free of likes and dislikes. I mean, I think, in this culture now where everything is shared online, it's so nice to have a private place that no one will ever see it, to be completely honest, where no feelings are forbidden, no experiences are forbidden, you can really say anything you want. And for me, with keeping a diary too, I always try to also remember put down also the things that I want to remember, because I think we forget so much about our lives. And actually had a lot of fun. I picked up one of the diaries that I kept in my 20s when I was in graduate school, getting a master's in creative writing. And it was so much fun to read back on, because I never would have remembered all of this. I had so much fun. And, it's fun to read during the pandemic, like going out. I was in my 20s, going out all the time, and just like, I was like, God, I really had a lot of fun. Like, it was just nice to remember what that was like. And I think it was just, it's a way of also preserving people you've loved in the past. And the diaries that I kept, before my mom died, I actually had spent quite a lot of time with her. She died like 9 days after being diagnosed with a cancer that had spread. So she was, a couple months before, she was actually very healthy, and we had spent a lot of time together. And so that diary, I think, is one of my most treasured possessions, because I have all the memories of spending that time with her in it. And it's so, we went to plays together, and it's so special. So I think just recording those memories and looking back on them is really, it's like time traveling, and it's such a gift to have those.
Wow. Over 100. That's amazing. That is really amazing. What a gift. I'm so glad you have those. Wow. Well, I am seeing some excellent questions, so I'm going to start tapping into audience questions, and I may sprinkle a few more of my own as we go. But there's a question: are there particular gardens in the world you haven't visited and want to visit?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Let's be here all night. I have this list of so many gardens that I'm dying to see. There's one in England called Great Dixter. That's this kind of a companion to Chanticleer. I keep hoping there's some like magical portal at Chanticleer that you dive down and you end up at Great Dixter, but I haven't found it yet. And then it looks so beautiful. And one thing I do like about social media is following all these gardens around the world. Following Great Dixter. There's one in Italy called Ninfa that sounds absolutely beautiful. And there's Sissinghurst Castle in England. And there's so many. grave tie in England. I have a huge list. So I'll put on my website someday of all these dream gardens to visit. I think I'd be happy just traveling the world and going to all these gardens one day.
I love that they're all, so are they, do these gardens, are they on Instagram or social media? Where?
Well, I think most of them are on Instagram, and you can follow them, and they're so beautiful.
Now I'm just going to go to your follows, Margo, and I'm going to go follow all the, I had no idea.
Well, we're so lucky actually in the Philadelphia area. I mean, Philadelphia is actually, I didn't even realize this until moving here. It's known as America's Garden Capital, and you can follow America's Garden Capital, and there's 36 area gardens that, and so many are so beautiful here too. So we're really lucky to have so many amazing gardens here too.
Yeah. Someone is asking whether or not you've read Emily of New Moon, which is also by Ellen Montgomery, apparently set in PEI about an aspiring writer, which I have not read.
Oh yes, I love Emily of New Moon. I think, I love it. I don't know why I'm so partial to Anne, maybe because she has red hair and I have a red haired daughter. So who I always tell my daughter that she has red hair because I read so many Anne of Green Gables books while I was pregnant with her, which is absolutely true. But I love Emily of New Moon too. It's such a great book.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to have to read that. Another reader wants to know, you've written YA, nonfiction essays, book reviews, pieces of journalism and memoir. Are there other genres you hope to write in someday that you haven't yet?
I would love to write a novel for adults too. And I would also, I'm not really sure how different they are, except for actually having, more grown-up characters. I feel like there's a lot of similarities between all novels. Even novels for younger children, I think there are some that, there's shorter often, but so beautifully crafted. Like, I see so many similarities between the genres, but I would also like to write a book-length nonfiction book too, because I do love nonfiction and books that incorporate interviews and, working with facts and arranging them in factual stories that have a novelistic narrative. I love also.
Do you know what you would want to write your nonfiction book on?
Well, I've been working on this essay, so we'll see if it could possibly turn into a longer work, but I have like 120 pages of it so far.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
But
that's amazing. Or I think we would all just read you visiting all those gardens you mentioned. Just Margo takes a tour of the gardens of the world.
I would love that.
Wonderful. Well, so let me ask you a little bit about sort of some of the, so now I know everything has changed now, the bubble tent, but in general, are your writing days, do they tend to be the same? Do you sort of, have set times that you write, or are you more flexible and kind of catch as catch can?
Yeah, I've had to be so flexible. I don't know what it's been like for you, but yeah, I've actually sometimes during the pandemic, there's a few times when I was working on some drafts of Lucy Clark and I ended up staying up the entire night. Like I actually pulled all-nighters, which I haven't done since college, where I would actually, start writing after everybody went to bed and keep on until the sun came up. Because I think to do, with my other books, I always would try to set aside several days where I would just work as, on a book-length draft without interruptions. But with everybody home, that wasn't possible unless I started at night and went all the way till 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning when people woke up. And the crazy thing is during the pandemic that I didn't even mind it. I actually would see the sun come up and have this sense of delight that I got this 8-hour work period in, because I'd actually really enjoyed it to have that, to be able to go through the entire book in a draft uninterrupted felt so, magical to have that time. But that's when I realized, wow, this pandemic is really making me crazy. I've been up the entire night and it's 7:30 in the morning and I'm actually feeling happy. Strange.
I love it. I love that. I mean, I totally identify with that. I feel like that particularly during the pandemic, that moment when everyone else in the house is asleep, there's finally, I feel like my brain can really focus.
Yeah, that it's definitely, I laugh that I used to say I never had enough time alone to write before, ha ha ha. Little did I know that, eventually, like I would literally never have time alone unless it was actually at, midnight till 7 o'clock in the morning. So it's really strange because part of the reasons I wanted to be a writer was loving time alone and needing it. So it's been really, what a change to go through over a year of not having that time alone. Has that changed you too? Not like it's such an experience.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I feel like it has given me such an, I don't know if it's the same way for you, but it's been very interesting to see all the people in my life reacting to it in lots of different ways. The introverts who basically have said, our lives have now changed, to the like very extroverted people on the other end who I think I've seen really suffering a lot this year, to the introverts who maybe have a lot of family members in their home with them who are struggling to do things like focus on their books. So I just think it's been so interesting. Basically the thing that I feel like I've noticed is that everyone has their thing that has been hard this year. Everyone's story is challenging in its own way.
Yeah. I feel like the pandemic has broken all of us in such different ways. And, I think we don't even really know how to talk about it yet. We can't all just walk around being like, I'm broken. How about you?
But that would be so healthy if we could say that. I feel like that would be the best way.
Yeah,
just own it.
What a year!
We talk all the time about how this is going to mark a generation, and sort of this idea of, I remember my grandmother who went through the Depression saving plastic bags from bread, and like the number of plastic bags, like old plastic bags that used to hold loaves of bread, that we found in her house, like stashed in every possible place. And it was because, she hoarded everything. She held on to everything. She reused everything. And so I'm interested to see how I feel like there's going to be some of those things that our grandkids are going to look at us and say, wow, they lived through COVID.
Washing the groceries.
Exactly.
Oh gosh, that's fun.
So there are a few more questions coming in. So it says, someone says, I love the names in your books. Do you have a method for choosing names for your characters?
Oh, it's funny. I actually make lists, and then sometimes I do go through I grew up in Queens, and I saved some old phone books back when you used to actually have phone books. So sometimes I will look through those for name ideas, and sometimes they just come out of the blue. Like some of the characters in here, actually, I do a writing retreat, and back in the before times, I used to do a writing retreat with a group of writer friends who I love and who helped me so much with this book. And there was one day years ago in the retreat where we were out for a walk, I think, and I ran back to the room, and like Mimsy's character just came out completely fully formed on the page. Like it just popped in there. Sometimes these moments come where a character just comes out in full form and thoughts and feelings and name. It doesn't happen all the time, but it did happen then. And I love it when that happens. But yeah, sometimes I have, and sometimes I don't do it well, the name thing. I remember there's one point my editor, who's absolutely been amazing through this book, Alexandra, I think I named someone after like a famous musician by accident, like a pop star. I can't remember what the name was, but she was like, you do know that it's actually a person. I was like, whoops. I'm reporting that out. So, sometimes I do get it wrong, but
I agree. I love your names. I love your names also. And old phone books. That's the best.
Yeah, I should someday when we're bored, we should call up some people and see if they're still in Queens.
There's another question here. Do you think you have found home in Pennsylvania now? Does it inspire you? Does Pennsylvania inspire you to write? How was it writing about Texas from a distance? And will you come and visit?
Let's see. I see who that question's from a very close friend in Austin who I miss a lot. I think it is becoming home here. It's funny, I think it's not until you leave a place that you realize how much you loved it. And I used to be in Texas thinking like, oh, I'm never going to be a Texan. This will never be home. But I was so unprepared for when I left it, just I absolutely ached for it. And I missed our friends like in such a deep and painful way. And I think sometimes maybe you don't even realize you are home until you leave it, until you realize that just how much you really did love it there. And I really felt that about Austin. I don't think I quite appreciated what a special place Austin was until I left it, just how easy it was to make friends there and the incredible literary community there. And they had this amazing book festival. And and all the incredibly talented writers there. There's such a tight-knit community of writers. And I don't think I had really understood how special that was till I left it. So I realized, like, I think falling in love with the Philadelphia area for me was very much connected to finding these gardens too, because they're like soul places also, like a place where I felt so completely at home and happy. One thing I do love about here is that I've really developed a profound love for the landscape. Like it's not like the trees. I remember when my son was 5 and we were driving around and he was like, why does Pennsylvania have such beautiful trees? Because in Texas, the trees are really short. They're not usually so big. So that was funny. Like even my kids sensed how different this landscape was. And I really do love the landscape here, which is so important. I think even just the Philadelphia area, the architecture and the old stone houses, it's so beautiful. And so that does really feel like home. In some ways, even more than New York City. I miss New York a lot, but New York is always changing so much. And when I go back there, I'm often, I don't know if you feel this when you go back to New York, but I'm often, like, there's a Second Avenue subway now, or I ache for New York too. And this book is set in the West Village, which has always been one of my favorite parts of New York City. And I miss that so much there too. And I miss the feeling of being there. I guess that's one of the things I love about New York, though. Like, it's never the same city. You can live there all your life. And you go down the street and it's completely different every time. And I can't wait to go back after the pandemic. I've never spent this long away from New York in my whole life.
Oh. Well, that was, we haven't even touched on the New York aspect. And I loved those, as someone who grew up in New York City, I thought, you just captured the sort of secret places of the city, the wildness of the city, the fact that it's a different city for every person. I loved seeing your take on it, and how vivid those descriptions were. They felt so lived in. So I loved that. There's a question here. Do your kids help you with character or plot ideas?
Ooh. They do actually. Actually, one thing I always struggle with so much is first pages, first sentences.
Yes.
I'm such a perfectionist. And so I think at one point I had like a first page and first sentence, like 10 different versions laid out on the floor. And I was just like, oh, what do I do? And my daughter actually helped me. She was like, obviously that one. It's, now that my daughter's actually 14 now, so it's like having an in-house focus group. So I really trust her. And she's a huge Song of Achilles fan. And she's read Song of Achilles so many times that I think our copy has disintegrated. So we actually have to buy a new copy.
Oh my gosh. Give her all my love. And obviously she sounds like an impeccable helper, editor, focus group, first reader. Because I agree with what Heather said, which is that your first sentence, your first page, wow. The book is just like a rocket ship from the very beginning. So 2 more questions, and then I think we're out of time. So one of them is, are there habits that you developed during the pandemic that you plan to keep with, either in terms of writing or sort of researching or thinking?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that the Madeline Miller method of walking along with the pages, I love that. Like, I actually realized there's something, I would call it like taking my chapter for a walk.
I love that.
So actually, I really love that, or taking my essay for a walk. Like, that's really helped me a lot, actually, even though, I'm muttering around the neighborhood, like looking, unique.
We should make it a thing.
I'm definitely going to keep doing that. My noise canceling headphones are my treasure that, you know, I can't live without. Now I might just have to start wearing them all the time. That's okay. Definitely, I love my bubble tent in the backyard is key. So I'm definitely going to keep using all of those things. But gosh, it'll be so nice. I used to occasionally write in coffee shops, and that would be nice to do again sometime, or a library. That would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is our last one, and this is someone who says, "You're forever a New Yorker, Margo, and I love Lucy's New York so much. My question is, how different, challenging was it to write a mystery? How did you do it?"
Oh my gosh, writing a mystery was so challenging. I had a lot of help from my writer friends, thankfully. I have one friend, Judy Blundell, who's an amazing author, and she's so helpful with mystery writing and plots. Thank you, Judy. She was so helpful throughout this process. You know, it's funny because I'm a huge reader of mysteries, so I always thought like, oh, it can't be that hard. You get this, you know, you like come up with the list of suspects and then the ending, and you know, it can't be that hard. Like, little did I know. It's so challenging. I think also writing this book, I felt almost like I was writing two books at the same time: the mystery plot and then the emotional arc of Lucy and her inner world and the friendships, and having the two woven in together, and still having the mystery be a surprise is so challenging. It's really hard to do. My hat is off to anyone who's ever written a mystery plot. It's much harder than it looks. So.
But it feels to the reader, I mean, it's so seamless, and it feels so satisfying to have those two pieces working together. I mean, so you made it look easy, even if it wasn't. So, well, I think we are out of time. So, Heather, thank you so much. Thanks to Children's Book World. Margo, thank you. This was such a delight. I'm so excited. Everyone, get your seeds, get your book.
Well, I just want to say my heart kind of sunk, Madeline, when you were like, this is going to be the last question, because this has just been an absolute delight to listen to both of you amazing women. I was like, what a perfect end of a day, you know? The only thing, you know, better, I know for Margo, would have been if we'd had our cake that we usually have when we're in person. So just between, you know, you, Madeline, and I, and everybody else watching, if you stay tuned to our newsletter, we're going to have some cake outside for Margo in the near future. Keep your eyes on that. And again, not to oversell it, but seriously, getting a seed packet from the master gardener, Margo, it's like getting the secret recipe from your favorite baker. I'm not joking. So please, you know, go ahead, order those signed copies, give us a buzz, jump onto our website. And again, Madeline, thank you so much. You were amazing. And Margo, congratulations. I mean, I am so happy to have this out in the world. What a terrific conversation, and what a phenomenal book. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thanks so much.